Christmas night is supposed to be a time of peace and celebration, but in 2018, while everyone else was celebrating, I was living through the most disturbing night of my life. Alone in my Arizona home, I discovered something so horrific that it still haunts me to this day. It was late, well past midnight. I was curled up on my couch, the last embers of the fireplace glowing faintly. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of the walls adjusting to the desert cold. That's when I heard it, a series of muffled thuds coming from the chimney. At first, I thought it was a bird or maybe some small animal trying to escape the cold. I grabbed a flashlight and moved cautiously toward the hearth, my heart pounding in my chest. I shined the light into the chimney, but all I saw was darkness. Probably nothing, I told myself. I went back to the couch, though I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. A few hours later, the smell started. It was faint at first, an acrid metallic odor that I couldn't quite place. But it grew stronger, filling the living room and creeping into the rest of the house. It was so overpowering, I had to cover my nose. The thoughts from earlier echoed in my mind, and a sickening thought began to form. What if something was stuck in there, something dead? Gathering my courage, I decided to investigate again. This time, I used a metal poker to prod around in the fireplace. My stomach churned as the smell intensified. That's when I saw it. Fabric. Torn, dirty fabric, clinging to something wedged deep within the chimney. I called the police immediately, unable to bring myself to investigate further. When they arrived, their faces turned pale as they worked to pull the object free. It was a man. His lifeless body was twisted unnaturally, his clothes torn and covered in soot. The officer's grim expressions said it all. This wasn't an accident. Later, they pieced the story together. The man was a burglar. He tried to break into my home by sliding down the chimney, but he got stuck. No one knows how long he was there before he succumbed to the suffocating darkness. The thought that he'd been there, above me, as I sat in my living room, was almost too much to bear. They say your home is your sanctuary, the one place you're supposed to feel safe. But after that night, my home didn't feel the same. Every creak, every noise, it all brought me back to that Christmas night. So if you ever hear strange sounds coming from your chimney, think twice before brushing them off. Let me take you back to Christmas Eve 2012. I was home alone, the glow of my Christmas tree casting shadows on the walls, the soft hum of holiday music filling the air. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, but that night something happened that I will never forget. It started around 9 p.m. I had just settled onto my couch with a mug of hot cocoa when I heard it soft, melodic voices singing Christmas carols. They were beautiful, harmonious, and coming from outside my front door. Curious, I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. The cold night air greeted me, but no one was there. I glanced up and down the street. Not a single soul in sight, yet the singing continued. It sounded distant now, as though the carolers had moved into the yard. My breath formed small clouds in the air as I stepped outside, calling out, "Hello? Is someone there?" But the only response was the faint echo of silent night fading into the stillness. Shaken, but trying to rationalize, I returned to the warmth of my home and locked the door. Hours passed uneventfully, but just as I started to doze off, a soft knock echoed through the house. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just a gentle, deliberate tapping. I froze, my eyes darted toward the door, but the thought of opening it again made my skin crawl. Instead, I waited, holding my breath. The knock came again, this time joined by faint whispers. They were so low I couldn't make out the words, but they were there, soft, insistent, gathering my courage. I peeked through the curtains. The porch light illuminated the yard, but again there was no one there. The whispers stopped as quickly as they had started. The rest of the night was a blur of paranoia. I swore I could hear faint footsteps pacing outside, but every time I looked, the street was empty. It wasn't until the next morning that I learned the truth. My neighbor, an older woman who had lived on the street for decades, told me about one Christmas Eve. A group of carolers, an entire family, had gone house to house, spreading holiday cheer. But as they returned home, a fire broke out, engulfing their small house just down the street. None of them survived. She lowered her voice as she finished the story, her eyes filled with something between fear and sympathy. People say they still wander the street on Christmas Eve, singing their carols, as if they don't know they've passed on. I don't know what I heard that night, but the memory still lingers. Every Christmas Eve, I leave a candle burning in my window, a small light to guide their way. So, the next time you hear carolers outside your door, think twice before you open it. Christmas is supposed to be a time of joy, laughter, and giving. But for me, Christmas 2015 was the beginning of a nightmare. Alone in my house, I received a gift I'll never forget, a snow globe that brought with it something far more sinister. It started innocently enough. I was 16 and home alone for the holidays. My parents were out of town and I'd convinced them I was old enough to handle a few days on my own. Christmas Eve arrived quietly, snow falling outside, the house unusually silent. That evening, as I sat by the window, a soft knock came from the porch. Confused, I peeked outside, but no one was there. Instead, on the doormat sat a small package wrapped in faded red paper with no tag or name. Curiosity got the better of me. I unwrapped the box to reveal a snow globe. Inside was a miniature house eerily identical to mine. The windows, the front porch, even the small wreath I'd hung on my door, all perfectly replicated. I shook it gently, watching the snow swirl around, a strange unease prickling at the back of my neck. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept glancing at the snow globe, now sitting on the mantel, as though expecting it to move. Around midnight, as I lay in bed, trying to fall asleep, I heard it, a faint creak from upstairs, the sound of footsteps. My heart raced. I froze, straining to listen. The steps were slow, deliberate, moving across the floor directly above me. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, but I couldn't bring myself to leave my room. Instead, I stayed awake, clutching the blanket, listening to the faint but steady creaking until it finally stopped. When morning came, I mustered the courage to investigate. Every door and window was locked, and nothing upstairs was out of place. But as I came back downstairs, my eyes fell on the snow globe, and my blood ran cold. The scene inside the snow globe had changed. The house was still there, but now there was something new, a small tall dark figure stood outside the front door, its shape hazy, almost like a shadow. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. I grabbed the globe and shook it violently, hoping the figure would disappear with the swirling snow. But when it settled, the figure was still there, now clearer than before. Panic set in. Who had sent this? What did it mean? I tried calling my parents, but the phone cut out after a few rings. That night, I barely slept, leaving every light in the house on and the snow globe in a cupboard where I wouldn't have to see it. By Christmas morning, I was exhausted. I decided to get rid of the globe, but when I went to retrieve it, it was no longer in the cupboard. Instead, it was back on the mantel where I had first placed it. The figure inside had moved closer to the house. Its outstretched hand now rested against the front door. That was it. I grabbed the globe and threw it into the trash outside, slamming the lid shut. But even as I walked back into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. To this day, I never found out who sent that snow globe or why. I moved out of that house a year later, but sometimes, on quiet nights, I still think I hear those footsteps. If you ever receive an anonymous gift, remember, it is not always a blessing.